Good morning and welcome to this week's Social Housing Roundtable, where we're discussing changing the stigma of social housing. Also, a very happy International Women's Day to everybody out there who is celebrating, which I'm hoping will be everybody. Let's hope this year we can break the bias. Here's to an excellent event. I look forward to seeing you all and sharing the event afterwards. As I say, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me today for a roundtable where we're going to be discussing changing the stigma in social housing. Got a few more people still joining as ever, which is always great. Those 10 a.m. meetings that finish at 11 are, you always need that minute to get yourself a cup of tea. But what I've certainly noticed is through the course of the roundtables and things this year, and it's great to see some new faces as well as some familiar ones. When we've been discussing a lot of the topics that have been coming up this year, the thing that's continually come through is there's still a stigma that goes with social housing. People who live in it, people who utilise the services, they're obviously a part of it. And more importantly, I think, in terms of the way that those who actually can support it sometimes still view the sector. And what I want to do is get together people today to really discuss about what we can do to try and change that. Whether any businesses have already got kind of initiatives in place which try and involve their tenants more, try and involve young people more in the sectors that they're supporting, or whether there's something we can be doing better as a sector to improve the voice of it. Because still so many people don't even understand what social housing is and what it can do to support the wider sector there. And I know a lot of people will know exactly what I mean here, but quite often people say, oh, I work in social housing, and they're like, what's that? And yet it's a sector that still supports so many people. So don't mind if anyone wants to kind of kick off the conversation. I don't mind how people want to run it today. To anyone who is new, as I say, please use the chat function if you don't want to actually speak. If you're happy to, then use the raise hand function, which is on the reactions in the bottom right, and I'll bring you in at any time. Or alternatively, physically raise your hand, and if you're on video, I'll make sure you come in. Seppi, great to have you with us. I'll pass over to you. Quickly introduce yourself first.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Seppi Yousafali. I'm the Development Liaison Manager with Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust. I've been in housing for the past 16 years and in development for almost a year now. And I've noticed it more than ever in development, the stigma and how people feel about social housing and social housing residents. Because when we built, especially under Section 106, you will have privately owned properties as well as social housing combined in one scheme. And on this particular scheme, I've noticed there is us and them. The social housing residents would find the private owned properties condescending, intimidating, and they don't join the governance groups. So in my opinion, which I have voiced it to our executive director, the governance groups do not represent absolutely everyone on the scheme. They're only privately owned residents. And because the social housing residents find them quite intimidating, they don't join those groups. So therefore, they're not represented, in my opinion. So even though 16 years in housing, I did notice it, but it's never been this visible to me. But in terms of what the solution is, I'm working on it. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I try to encourage our social housing residents to join the governance groups. I've even offered to accompany them. I've reminded them that I'll attend most of the meetings if I'm not on leave or off sick. I'll be a part of those meetings, so I'll be monitoring people's behavior. But I haven't been able to recruit anyone from social housing to join those groups. So yeah, more than ever, it's visible to me now.
Thank you very much for sharing, and obviously for talking about what you're trying to do to change it. And I couldn't agree more with a lot of what you were saying there. I've been in social housing on the recruitment side now for a decade, and I think one of the key things that's continually coming through is there is still this idea that exactly what you said there of us and them. A couple of quick hellos. We've got Kitty, who was in social housing in Africa for 10 years. So great to have you with us. And Nyasha, who is interested in social housing as a social entrepreneur, but has also been a social entrepreneur for many, many years and has many more strings to her bow than that. And I'll definitely get you involved in the conversation shortly. But Joe, thank you for your patience. Please come in.
Hi, I think for me, it's a conversation you and I had, Matt, a few weeks ago in terms with the stigma of social housing. It's an undercurrent in everything throughout the sector. And something I've really observed over the last few months since I've come back into social housing from my career. And just some of my experiences of different things that I've noticed. So where people feel that they're not eligible for social housing, there's that sort of stigma around I'm not eligible for a housing association property or social housing property. So it's changing those sort of attitudes from society, as well as you say, Seppi, I've been involved in Section 106 agreement handovers, and it's getting private residences and our own customers within social housing to really want to partake and participate with each other, get involved within the estate. There's a bit of nimby-ism, of not in my backyard type scenario, where people don't want to buy off plan from private residences from where they are. And I think for a lot of our own staff within the social housing sector as well, and it's not as meant as a, I really hope in this day and age where most of us work within the social housing sector, it's not a conscious decision. But, for example, with repairs, where we expect customers to be in for 24 hours for an emergency now, or where we expect customers that we'll give them a morning appointment, and we can change it to the afternoon, or we can come in the morning when we've arranged it for the afternoon, because customers are going to be there because they're not working. And it's not meant as a conscious decision. I truly believe that. But unfortunately, it's so ingrained in our society. I think that's a big stigma. And some of the things I'm trying to do within my organisation is challenge those unconscious biases of the typical customer base within social housing has had a huge change. Society has changed over the last 50 years significantly. So it's really challenging those barriers and perceptions. But it's a one small step at a time for me, and how we do that. That's kind of it.
I know it sounds awful, but with the way energy prices and things are going this year, I think more and more people than ever are going to discover what social housing is, and are going to discover what, as well as, affordable housing isn't affordable. I don't, this idea. I was speaking with Antra Women's Aid a few weeks ago, and one of the conversations that came out of that was someone saying, well, what do you define as social housing? And it very quickly became clear. They went, oh, you mean council housing, just with the new name. And yet a lot of it hasn't necessarily changed, but the cost of housing now is ridiculous. I've got a good friend of mine who's just bought a 2 up, 2 down Kings Heath terraced house, and it's cost him £280,000. It is absolutely madness. Michael said, morning all, head of service at various RHAs, also director of developers. I know 106s have headed repairs compliance for all tenures, and he is currently between contracts. Michael, great to have you with us. Annie, thank you for raising your hand. Do come into the conversation. To anyone who was a bit late coming in, if you want to join in, please just raise your hand or put something in the chat. I'll bring you in as the conversation continues. It is very much an open conversation for all. Sani.
Thanks, Matt. I think the stigma within social housing obviously stemmed from the council days, where a lot of the councils had the housing stocks and everything else. Moving forward, as housing associations, we haven't really bridged the gap for our tenants and customers to understand the differences between when it was council and what it is now as a social housing and affordable housing for all. And because a lot of people are not aware that social housing is a solution of affordable housing for everyone, not just somebody that is poor, for instance. It's an affordable housing for everyone. I bid every week for my local housing associations, because if I can get into a social housing properties, I will be more than happy, because it's literally everything is done for you. You pay your bills month in, month out, just like you would private renting or paying your mortgages and everything else. but most importantly, you're living in affordable housing where it's safe to live as well, because housing associations provide a safe home environment for people to live in. And to tackle the stigma within that, we need to understand the reason why these stereotypes come out, because anything that comes to social housing within the media sector and everything else, have you ever seen anything positive from social housing tenants that come through the medias? Nothing. And the only thing you get from the medias and everything else will be the negative aspect of it. And that is then pushed throughout the whole society, and everyone then have this mindset, oh, that's all it is that happens in social housing. And that forms people's opinions, and even people that work within social housing themselves, because they own their own properties or X, Y, and Z, they feel like they're in a better position than somebody that might live in social housing, in turn not give too much 100% to support some people within social housing. So that comes with a different problem itself, because the person that's supposed to be delivering good services to these tenants is also having that negative stereotypes of them. So then they're not giving 100% customer satisfaction or customer service when they do carry out the work. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done outside the organizations and also within internally of the organizations themselves.
I couldn't agree with a lot of what you're saying there. Yeah, we couldn't agree more. Apologies, I meant to say more, because this negative connotation with what social housing is the big thing. And as you say, when we're having issues with the fact that, you know, I like on one side that we're seeing some of the big providers being called out by people like Quajo, by other people, by media, saying this is the state of some of the social housing issues, and I completely agree. But there is so much positivity in social housing and what it does deliver that just isn't communicated about. People then don't know about it as a career option. People don't know about it as a life option and as a support service. And I'm on it's coming out on Saturday. Like, this is a tiny little plug. There's a lady called Ali Monjak who I'm on her podcast on Saturday, discussing a lot of exactly this problem, which is that people either don't know what social housing is, or if it does, just imagines a tower block and imagines poverty and imagines problems with drug and alcohol abuse and goes, I don't want anything to do with it. And it is so much more than that. Evie, thank you for being patient. Please come in.
No worries at all. I think just, sorry, I'm Evie, first timer. I live and work in Scotland, have done my entire professional career. And before, I guess there's two things for me. I'm born and raised in a council scheme. My mum and dad still live in the same house I was brought up in. Up until I was about 15, the most exciting thing that ever happened to me was a decant for, you know, major investment work to happen to the home that they still live in today. And I think that for me, and the difference that made to our lives, it really sort of took me into housing as a career. I mean, I trained as a journalist. I had no intention of following that when I seen the power that I could be part of in changing communities and helping friends and neighbours and family and people that lived round about me. There is no greater privilege than serving my hometown. But also, I think there's another piece that, you know, we can't do this alone. I think that there's a real issue in government, certainly in England. It's not the same here, but you know, the view of social housing has changed massively over the years. Huge push for home ownership and ownership options, lack of investment and delivery of new supply at the scale of which it's required. If you look comparatively to the Scottish government, you know, 50,000 homes target of the last government, the majority of those were affordable homes. 100,000 homes target this time, the majority of those are social housing, and they become more of a kind of, you know, object of desire of sorts. And I think, you know, from my own experience, when I first started with the Big Housing Association here, we did a big regen scheme in a place that nobody had ever exercised the right to buy. Now, it was quite a small scheme, it was 60 properties, 20 of them were for sale. They sold in 2 months. Nobody had ever exercised the right to buy in that area. And I know it's only 20, but nobody, you know, hundreds of people lived there. And it was just, you know, that provision of other options. This is part of a suite of housing solutions for people. And you just, you know, I think that piece of picking the bit that's best for you at a particular time of your life, you know, I'll never be a homeowner, proud private renter, you know, but I think we're here to do a job, and I think sometimes that kind of core purpose is almost kind of overwhelming to people outside as well. It's powerful and it's made you know, many amazing things happen, but I guess there's a balance, as there is with most things. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, and it's great to have you with us. I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of what you said there's very true. I'm a private renter. This is not my background. The reason this is a bit blurry is because my girlfriend's just moved in. There are boxes everywhere behind me. It's chaos. You know, I'm again proud private renter. And actually, I've been working with Bournemouth Village Trust now for about 6 years from a recruitment side, and their properties came up, and their properties are stunning. They are beautiful properties. Some of them. Trying to get in on any form of rent, right to buy, or anything at all, not a chance, because the list is so big, because they are desired. And yet there's still the stigma that goes with it. I'm going to bring Joe back in 2 seconds. I'm just going to read out some of the comments. Thank you all for commenting today. As you said, there's a very good point there about people serving inside the sector also being superior towards their clients who use their services. And unfortunately agree. I think sometimes even that recruitment piece is vital in terms of making sure we're getting the right people to come in and work with housing associations. You've got to have that commercial mind, but if that social heart isn't there with it, then we're in trouble. And Claire, I do often think we create issues where there are none, or they're not important to the people who live in our properties. I've worked in housing for over 20 years, and the people haven't changed any more than we have. We and they isn't a thing. We are all people and just have different perspectives. Professionals simply need to stop looking down on residents. And if that doesn't kind of convey that point, then I don't know what we're going to kind of take away, because too often we judge, way too often. Joe, let me bring you in, and then I've got Jim and Rachel.
Just a couple of very quick points there, and a handy plug for next week's roundtable about customer experience in housing. You're absolutely right, Claire. We need to stop looking down on residents and work with our residents. So that's kind of the first point. And I think it was just to pick up on what you said, Evie and Matt, about the recruitment options in housing. We're not seen as a career choice. It's never really talked about as a sector, but there's huge varieties of careers within this sector, but we don't talk enough about it. Over the last 2 years, whilst yes, there has been failings within a lot of the sector that's been highlighted, you know, by the fantastic work that Kwajo and, you know, other people are doing within the sector to really call out the issues that are experienced by customers. But, you know, how much good work has the sector done that we've not really spoken about in reacting to COVID, picking up some of the work that where other services have had to cut back on their services. It's, you know, where we're working in partnership. And I think it's important, as much as we recognise the bad stigma that we all know that goes on within the sector, it's important that we recognise what's good about the sector as well, for me.
The biggest issue I sometimes have with housing, and I've said this to yourself and to others, and to anyone who doesn't know, Joe is coming on as my guest speaker for next week, discuss customer experience and it being a buzzword in housing, what it actually means. So very much looking forward to that one. But I think one of the biggest issues we have in housing is, and I mean this probably with 90% at least of this room, is you're too humble. You are too humble. There is too much humility kind of going on. And don't get me wrong, it's important when you're working with the people you are, but you need to shout about the successes. That, you know, we talk about the fact that only the negative news is coming out. We need to have more people in the sector who can stand up and go, actually, we achieved this, we did this, getting in front of media outlets and showing what we've done. Because there is so much success in this sector, there's so much joy, and there's so much of a career path and career options for people who don't know a route into what they want to do. People who want to support people but don't want to be a support worker, they don't know about other options. But they don't know about it because with the media, certainly there isn't enough voice there to say, look how great this is as a sector. And it's something I'm trying to champion as much as I can, but the more voices we can get, the better. Jim, let me bring you in. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you. Let me just turn my video on. I've had it switched off because my dog's been going a bit mad.
Not a problem at all.
So I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle to most other participants, I think, in that I work for a local planning authority. So I deal with doing the paperwork, I suppose you'd call it, and all the noise around it, and some observations that I just jotted down just from my experience, and maybe it'll be helpful to give you just that the angle that I look at it from. So fundamentally, I think one of the key problems when we have new housing schemes coming through the planning system is that the people who shout loudest first set the narrative, and that narrative is always, we don't like this, it's change. People are afraid. Ultimately, the people who are shouting are those who are afraid of what might happen to the value of their asset, which is their own home. It's not rational, I don't think, but that doesn't really matter because if your home goes up, then everyone else's does as well. So you haven't actually gained anything. All you've done is just locked out the next generation. I think I heard an analogy about 20 years ago where you just pulled the ladder up behind you, pulled the housing ladder up behind you. But that kind of home ownership dream has created a political power base nationally and locally that shouldn't be underestimated. So there's a lot of people who are afraid of change, and they're afraid of this kind of hypothetical impact on the value of what they see as their investment rather than their home. There's that, homogenous is safe and different is not safe. So if you're on an estate, a new build estate where there's no affordable, there's no social, then you know exactly what you're going to get, and so then it feels safer for people, and they're worried about others. There's I know it's horribly cynical, isn't it?
No, but Claire's put in the chat there, othering is a major issue in our society. It's how we divide ourselves, and it's exactly that.
Yeah, it is. The last point I'd make is about cynicism in more rural areas. So if there's a proposal for an exception site, then people will see it as, well, they'll just flip it to market, and we don't want any housing here, really. There's nothing wrong with having affordable housing for our kids, or social housing even for our kids, even better, but just not here. We want it somewhere else, somewhere that's nearby but doesn't affect us. That's effectively it. But that cynicism, that kind of Trojan horse point, it keeps coming up again and again and again with local housing needs surveys.
Kind of fear of the unknown? Is it because there isn't enough that goes on in terms of saying, actually, these are the positives of social housing? I know we've talked about it a couple of times, but do you think that's because all you see in the media is the negativity associated with it?
I think it's just, so there's been the narrative for so long, hasn't there, that we have the dream of home ownership, and that's the be all and end all. And if you don't own your home, then somehow you've failed. Whereas because we're isolating ourselves even more as a nation from continental Europe in particular, where they go, you're mad, ploughing all your money into that. And they see it as like a Ponzi scheme, or more like. So the tenancy protection rules are different, much more geared towards stability and
much more
livability. Rather than you just have an asset that you speculate, and maybe you'll win. It's looking like a one-way bet for a lot of people. Maybe you'll win. You have to be really unlucky to lose, so jump on that bandwagon. So it's all about investment and all about fear of losing, that fear of losing out as a result of someone else. And my last comment, and then I will shut up, I promise.
No, don't be at all.
My last comment is something that I've noticed over the last sort of decade or so, is that there's been much more of a shift away from people saying, well, I'm doing all right, and I'd really like other people to be doing all right as well, because then society as a whole is richer and safer and more vibrant and more comfortable. It's more about the analogy of the banker with the Jaffa cakes. Have you heard that one?
I haven't.
Maybe where there's a banker and other, and then one of us sat round a table with some Jaffa cakes on there, and the banker helps himself to 11 of the 12 Jaffa cakes, and then leans into the us and says, you want to watch that other, they want your Jaffa cake. And I think that's the way society's gone, really. And I think we need to break that really negative cycle of the fear of the unknown, and we need to be much louder in these are your children, these are your families, these are the people who can't pay into your pension because they're paying all their money to rent, and it's all going to come crashing down if we're not careful. I think, use that fear for a positive angle.
And flip, and like you say, and flip the narrative. No, thank you, Jim. And it's great. It's absolutely great to have you with us. And this idea of fear of losing out, and again, that dream of home ownership, because so many people are making so much money on it now over, continued period of time, they're going, well, that's the way you get money for your kids in the future and that kind of stuff. And that's because stuff isn't affordable anymore and the housing market doesn't make sense. So thank you very much. I'm going to bring Rachel in just a second, just some messages in the chat. So I will send around the links that have been shared as well. So if anyone's got any links they want to share, then I'll ping those around in an email afterwards. But Evie has said this is a really cool piece of work starting in Scotland on housing as a career from SFHA. So that's brilliant and great to see stuff going on. Izzy Howard, there is a major issue with unconscious bias that Joe mentioned earlier. I work in extra care and retirement housing, and often people make assumptions about older people being vulnerable, bed blockers, etc. We need to celebrate the successes and also work with residents when things go wrong, and be honest and be transparent and be human. And I mean, if we're not working in housing for those reasons, then therein lies a problem. And again, I think this comes back to this issue of, are we running a housing association to support people, or are we running it as a business? And what the two things come there. It often makes me laugh when people go, we're not for profit, but the chief exec's on 170 grand a year. Right, well, there's clearly money being made then. So we talk for my old colleagues at CIH Futures, completely agree, phenomenal initiative. Again, I don't think is in the mainstream media enough. Housing as a career of choice is one of their big areas of work for the next couple of years. So that's fantastic to hear. And there's a Twitter link there, so I'll be following that afterwards. And she's mentioned that she thinks that's a great point, Jim. There's going to be a big rise of people looking to social housing as the market offers less of an affordable and viable option for many. Kitty has said a big issue is starting with homes and recreational facilities are an afterthought. Start with sports and cultural buildings first, then the community using them get to know and trust each other as they move in. Rent collection and maintenance becomes the main narrative if you begin housing before culture and sport community building. And Sally has said, Jim, we need to hold the right people accountable in our society. I mean, both those points, I agree with you in terms of accountability, and building a community is everything. Again, it's something we've got coming up. And in fact, I've got Rachel, who's about to join the chat in a moment, coming on for a roundtable lead with me next month to discuss how we can use contractors utilise their corporate social responsibility targets to support communities. That's going to be a really, really interesting discussion. That's on 12th of April, I'm going to go with 12th of April, I believe. But both of those points, I completely agree with you. We need to build communities, because we can build communities, and then whatever the housing is, even if it's rental, but it's affordable, that works. You get people a home, get them a base, allow them to build a life around it, they'll be happy. Doesn't matter in the short term how that looks. We've just got to get this part right. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Rachel, Head of Community Regeneration at a housing association in South Wales. Wanted to come at this from a bit of a different perspective, because obviously the challenge is, how do we tackle the stigma of social housing? I think obviously as a result of COVID, the local authority, particularly in Wales, obviously I don't know what's happening across the border or with our northern cousins. Hi Evie, by the way. And I suppose what we're finding with all of our new build developments is everyone that's being allocated those homes, because we obviously have choice-based allocations that comes from the local authority. We have absolutely no choice in who goes into our homes, and why should we? That's absolutely fine. It needs to go to the greatest need. But what we're finding is that's individuals who are coming from homelessness backgrounds or chaotic backgrounds, or are fleeing domestic violence. Therefore, every single one of our new build properties is going to individuals who do have those greater support needs. We are not a support provider. We are a housing association, even though we do provide support. And those statutory functions have obviously reduced massively with budget pressures. So we're not creating cohesive communities, essentially, which is then therefore making the stigma of social housing even worse, because individuals are then moving in to what we've tried to build as a cohesive community, where we've got social rent, we've got intermediate rent, and we've got market rent, all there, but oh, let's have a look. That floor is the social housing floor, and they're the ones that are always smoking weed, and they're the ones that are always engaging in antisocial behaviour, because we don't have that ability. So I think government and local authority policy needs flipping. It comes back also to some of the points that have been made in the chat, and also what Jim was saying around planning. We're not involving individuals from that local community at an early enough point. So we're basically going, here's a piece of land, wonderful. We think, because we've looked at the local market needs assessment, which is 5 years out of date anyway, that we need 2 and 1 bed properties, but the 2 beds are going to go to families, the 1 beds are going to go to single people, and that again is going to cause friction, because what do single people do? They have friends around, and you know, they might be up a bit later. What do families do? They have children that run around and make noise in the garden and make noise in the walls. You're going to create issues already. So from like a lived experiences point of view, why are we not getting the people from whether they're going to be social housing tenants or not, residents from that particular community involved right at the beginning, say, what is it that your kids need? What is it that you see that your neighbours need? So we've got a perfect example of an individual, one of our developers came to us with a package deal. He said, it's my land, it's in my local town, village, it's tiny, very, very rural Wales. And he said, and I want it to be all social housing, because one of my really close friends has just lost their home and they've got nowhere to live, and they're going to have to take their kids out of school. So I don't want to make profit on this. I want it to be social housing, and we need more of those types of individuals. But realistically, we don't have them, because for profit, money talks, etc. Final point, and I will shut up, is just the lack of understanding of the volume of support work that the sector delivers. You know, we do digital inclusion, financial inclusion, education, training, employment, corporate social responsibility in terms of community projects. You know, we're heavy investors, and we're local anchor organisations, and that isn't celebrated enough. That's not in the media enough. That individuals who actually are coming into social housing probably get the most support than any other tenure. Because essentially, if I can't pay my rent as a private renter or my mortgage as a homeowner, who do I have to go to? Citizens' advice, basically. That's about it. Whereas in social housing, you've got all of these other avenues, and I don't think that necessarily is shouted about. And if the wider public were aware of the volume of support that is given to social housing tenants, we may be able to reduce that nimby-ism. Because honestly, if I could get a social housing tenancy, I would grab it with both hands. And when I've had tenants come to me and say, oh, I'm looking at this private rent, I'm like, no, stop, no, don't get rid of your social housing tenancy, because they are like gold dust. All of my family were council housing tenants, some still are. And, you know, I say the same to them, don't buy it, stay with the council. But anyway, yeah, so that's me and my thoughts.
No, I really appreciate it, and thank you very, very much for coming. And definitely a few things to digest there. Kitty said, build units in such a way that buyers can easily divide them. They can live in and earn income simultaneously. They'll be more likely to purchase. And I think it's interesting at the moment. I'm working with a couple of national businesses, and one are for profit. And it's been an interesting moral dilemma of my own to work with them, because on one side, I'm social housing through and through. That's where I support. It's the sector I love and everything else. But on the other side of it, not enough money is being invested into the sector from central government. Not enough money is coming in to develop the stock we need. If there are businesses doing it for profit in the right way, are they doing it? And it's taking a lot of kind of due diligence to decide which ones to work with and which aren't. But what's been really interesting speaking with them actually has been someone came around going, right, well, we're building a supported housing block, but this is going to be 6 to 30 male homelessness with this up to this level of mental health need. That is the block there. That is what that's built for. Right. This is going to be this. Because I was talking to a gentleman who is actually on Marie Jenkins, who's with us today. It was on her podcast. Really nice, really, he'd lived in social housing for a number of years. Great guy. And he moved into a new block. It was all going well, was very happy there. But the business he was with merged with another. And the business which merged with another, the larger organisation that took over, had some voids in that property, and immediately went, okay, great. Well, what we're going to do is we'll just move. We'll partner with Mencat, and suddenly we're moving in people with very high mental health needs. Now he was just looking for somebody. It was more of an elderly scheme, but kind of 60 to 80 in that kind of region, minimal support needed. But suddenly had people with high level schizophrenia and other things living in his block, and he's going, am I wrong for being aggrieved about this, because I know there needs to be support services, but on the other side, this isn't what I signed up for, because if it was, I wouldn't have signed up to this block, and I thought this was going to be this kind of residential. So I agree with you completely. When we talk about some of those things, we need to make sure we're discussing with the tenants at an early stage what this fit for purpose is, because then it will be long lasting and everyone will be happier. As he said, with cannabis being legalized worldwide, the mindset will change over time, but just having safe spaces you do with pubs to enjoy it in a non-judgmental setting will help. Housing rules need to keep up with legislation, which again is an interesting kind of discussion to have. Marie, did you want to come in and kind of give an overview of some of the stuff about the podcast we were discussing on that day? Because I think that really kind of relates to some of the things we're discussing here. Maybe. Oh, maybe not. Right, okay. I think we're trying to come off mute, but we might have some internet issues there. Right, not an issue at all. The other point that I realised when you talked about there is how much support social housing does give its residents and does give to people in general. And talk about mental health and those kind of things is absolutely key. I was reading before this, I was trying to do some research, and Shelter did a report which says that they commissioned a vision for social housing in the aftermath of Grenfell, and found that basically 2/3 of private renters felt that people would perceive them in a more negative light if they lived in social housing. Why is that? Where does that come from? You know, what is the issue? And I mean, I'm obviously a little bit, you know, maybe because I work outside of the sector and kind of look in. Does anybody have an idea of where this stigma is? It because of tower blocks and maybe the media reporting, or is it something else that people look at and go, when I see social housing, I immediately judge it?
Benefit Street, that's where it all started. Programs like Benefit Street and the media portrayal of individuals within social housing and that whole us and them, and it all came from Thatcher's era, essentially. It's from the right to buy, and then suddenly if you can't buy, you're not worthy, and therefore if you have to, because council housing back in the days that my grandparents that was what you did. You got married, you went to the council and you said, can I have a house please? And they went, here you go. And that was always the point. It was always, you know, then you were able, if you were able then to move into buying a home, then you did. And I just think it's that media portrayal of that us and them. They're not worthy, I'm more worthy. And then you've got the subset of us and them, whereby people don't meet the thresholds for social housing, have to go into private rented housing, can't afford the private rented housing, and then hate people in social housing for the fact that they've met threshold. It is so messed up, but that's my opinion as to where it's come from. It's historic and it's media. No,
it's brilliant. Thank you. Seppi, let me bring you in.
Just wanted to echo what Kitty, Jim and Sani said. It's a mindset from the council property days. People said, oh, I was raised in a council property. And sometimes now I watch documentaries, and they're talking about someone really successful, and the first thing they say, and I've noticed it over and over again, it really annoys me. They say, oh, she or he grew up in a council or social housing estate. And I think, how is that even a factor? Why does it matter where you grow up? You're successful now. And I've seen it over and over again in documentaries that they emphasize on that.
Stuff like talent shows, don't you?
Yeah.
Like you just said that there. Immediately I just went, talent show was my first thought, going, as if, yeah, like you say, as if immediately that's a negative. They were on a bad foot to begin with.
So they think that they deserve, I don't know, more recognition in their success because they grew up in a council estate or a social housing. I used to notice it a lot in American programs where they used to use the word, oh, I grew up in the project, or she was from the projects. But in the past few years, I've noticed that we use it a lot in the UK with, you know, people that grew up or lived in social housing or council estate. I don't think that should even be a factor. That's just my opinion.
No, and it's certainly an interesting one, because people do like a rags to riches story. They do like a success when maybe you haven't had the silver spoon, in air quotes, at the beginning. But it is seen as such a negative on the other side that actually it's then almost, you know, it's constantly putting down, yeah, well, if they've done that, they've done even better, because that's really bad. you know, almost growing up in social housing is really bad. I didn't see who was first. That was Sani and Kitty. Kitty, I'm going to go with yourself because we've not had you speak, and then Sani, I'm going to bring you in. Kitty, I can see you put a lot in the chat, so we'll come back to it in a second, but please speak first.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Sorry, man. I don't use Zoom very often, and I wasn't planning on speaking here. Yeah, it's a little bit different for us here in South Africa. I mean, I've been in social housing for 10 years, and there is a similar stigma to being in social housing, but from where I was, from my perspective anyway, the social housing that we had here in South Africa was actually much better than some other privately owned social housing. And I mean, a lot of it with our particular ones that we had, a lot of it was a single woman with children, and there were a few with 1 or 2 children, but I mean, a lot of them, I mean, they would with her child or 2 children, and those kids loved it. They absolutely loved it because it was a community. I mean, when you come to the office in the morning, or in the afternoon, all the kids are outside, busy playing, having fun, doing their thing. And then you've got the parents coming at home in the afternoons, and it's very much a big community. And everybody knows everybody's business as they do.
That is the joy of community, is the fact you get that collaboration. And you know, when you do have a social, and this is so often the issue when people are trying to kind of regenerate a housing stock. If they're then displacing people or moving people away, the thing they've lost is their community, because that's what brings people close together and makes them love their homes. And I agree with you completely. I think on a couple of points there, Rachel Honey-Jones has said, just on the previous point, is that not because the barriers to being successful are much greater if you come from a, air quotes, deprived background? They really are, and there's a balance between the two. And as I say, it's great to share the story. It's how maybe the narrative needs to change around that they weren't gifted everything at the beginning, but actually the stock they lived in was great. Or if they were in something that was because, like I say, social housing is so diverse in itself, and I think that's one of the issues. Is people think social housing is just, it's all one type of thing and it's poor. Whereas
it's not.
Some of it's amazing. Rosalind,
it's not. I mean,
I'm sorry.
Sorry. I mean, I managed about 1,300 units. Okay, so you would go in, you go and inspect your units, and everybody in there is different. Okay, you'll have people that are living in there that they've got a chair. They're living with a chair and a TV maybe. And then you'll go into another unit and you'll have somebody living the best furniture you can find. You know, so everybody's circumstances is different, even in social housing. And I mean, it's up to us as well to know our tenants and to know what their needs are. I think furnished social housing is also a good idea.
We had a roundtable. I'll make sure I get you the recording over, which is about furniture and fuel poverty. And we got a couple of people to bring in, but I agree with you on that, because so often people will move into social housing, or they'll be fleeing domestic violence, or whatever it will be. If they haven't then got a bed, a sofa, furnishings, place to eat, etc., then that in itself, I agree with you completely. Rosalind has said, is it also the physical environment? They aren't always well maintained by the landlord, and this is seen as the residents not caring. And I agree more with that. Absolutely. Yasmin, sadly, it's the relationships that are made with money and success. The more successful, you have to enlarge that you came from humble beginnings. Social housing needs to involve residents, give them a sense of pride in where they live. And Evie, totally agree. RHJ, that would have been a far way like that. Thank you. And I'd also argue seeing someone from a place like you're doing something successful is a huge encouragement that you could do. So many communities now are mixed tenure thanks to Right to Buy. How the community affects everyone who lives there. When will place matter more than tenure? Rachel, also shiny new builds are lovely, but without investing in current older stock, social housing will be seen as the worst type of housing tenure. And Jim, I also wonder whether the scarcity is also a factor. It is seen as a safety net. That itself is arguably a function of housing being seen as a commodity first rather than a human right. Couldn't agree more with that. With scarcity comes tighter criteria, and with tighter criteria comes reducing diversity of lived experience of people who live in social homes. The most vulnerable and of least means are seen as the social tenants, and that is what homeowners are afraid of. Casey, I'm going to come back to you in a second. I realise Sunny's been waiting a little while. I'm going to bring Sunny in and I'll come back to you. Sunny, over to you.
Yeah, I was just
Okay.
going to echo what Rachel's point made, what she said earlier on when she mentioned you have that the difference between people within social housing and outside social housing and people that want to get into social housing, and the stigma and the differences and the reason why X, Y, and Z, X hate Z and Y Z hate Y, because when you look at the social housing and the council allocations over the years, it was I think it might have been Evie that mentioned that you got married and you go to council, you ask them for a property and they say, there you go, there's a property for you. There was surplus back then when it was available, easily accessible, but now it's very tight, and the margin of people getting one, you can be on the list for 10 years and still not get one because you're on different bandings now. But then you have the mentality of the people, shall I say, more indigenous people that are used to that system with generation of families that have lived in council properties or social housing properties, where they feel entitled to getting housing, to getting a property. So because they're not getting that, and they're seeing brown people and all these other communities getting housing before them, then they have this stigma and this hate against them. And again, it all comes through from media and the way media portray things. Or look at this family, you just come over, or they've been given it a housing association properties. And all of that feeds into this general negative connotations that comes with social housing. And as you said earlier, Matt, housing is very diverse, very, very diverse. And with it comes with different challenges in different areas. And to try and put it all into one little place, we'll never be able to get the full reasoning of why the stigma is there. But how do we challenge ourselves within the sector to increase the positive approach that everybody sees? So we need to do our own part by showcasing the work that we do within housing to our friends and families, but then on the platforms of people that have that platforms to also showcase these positive experiences, either from the tenants or from the professional and what you do and where you work. By doing that, there's going to be a lot more awareness within the housing sector, and of course, driving the likes of CHC, based in Wales, and CIH, and all of these company organizations that oversee the housing associations, by getting them to actually go out in the community, wider community, to showcase the work the housing associations do, because we're paying membership to them, we're paying homage to them, and it's
I think
a
what's really
disservice.
interesting on some of that, I was speaking with a housing provider in Birmingham, and I'm not going to name drop because I don't want to get people in trouble, but I was speaking to a housing provider who they have a tenant who they are willing to home, who has unfortunately racked up so much debt through the local council, and we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands. Been around, hasn't worked out. They've got their life together, but there's £20,000 or something worth in arrears. Now, the council are never going to chase that. They know they're never going to get that money back, but they won't write it off, which means this person cannot get a social housing property because it won't pass the regulatory checks. That in itself is another stigma of social housing, because that's someone who needs it, that's going, look, I've messed up. I've really messed up. I need a chance. But instead they will be in temporary accommodation now for years to come, which will cost them and central government a lot more money. And yet nothing is being fixed. Yasmin, I just wanted to quickly bring you in because you've shared a link with us. I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, what it is, I really was hoping that I could find it actually, because I remember years and years ago, we were having a really, really healthy discussion. This is when I used to work for East Thames, which is now L&Q East. We were having a really healthy discussion because some of us were being sent away on workshops, especially the housing teams, because mixed tenure, it kind of probably emerged a little bit before that, but it was kind of coming into the forefront.
Okay. Oh, have you lost it?
We're still discussing it now, 15 years later. She was saying that, you know, the more that, you know, you put more and more social housing like residents together, but what happens is the neighborhood kind of becomes like a ghetto, so to say. Years later, I went to work in Tower Hamlets, and I actually saw that. Because I think there was quite a dense population of Bengali community in Tower Hamlets, and they started to put them like all together. And that in itself kind of created a lot of social problems. But I am going to bring up again the fact that, you know, we're not the only country in Europe that are social housing providers. And I think they seem to be doing a better job of it than us. And I would really, really like it if there's anybody here senior enough, if we can look at the model of what they're doing in Europe. I've got friends that have come over from Denmark, and they involve their residents in a lot of things, like the gardening, the upkeep. They help them to like plan events. I know that it all sounds really amazing and, you know, you need funding to do all of these things, but I think that the bigger picture is a lot more needs to be funded to actually do proactive things with residents. And I really love the point someone made earlier as well. In my whole career in social housing, which spans about 16 years, I've seen a lot of positivity. There's been great, amazing steps, like women, I speak another language, you know, helping women to like become independent, helping women to manage bank accounts. All of that was done by social housing, but sadly, we never get to read about that. Instead, we get to watch programs made by horrible Channel 4, like Benefit Streets and, you know, ASB. And it's always, oh, look, here we are, we're at this social housing estate. Like, why does it have to be like that? And I just think that the people above, they just need to open their eyes a little bit, that we don't have to make social housing needy. I think social housing landlords are inspiring. I think they're motivating. And this is what I've always believed. I mean, excuse me if I sound like I'm got my head in the clouds a little bit, but
you
I
don't
just think
at all. And I think
housing,
there's a reason that there's a reason that so many people who work in the sector stay in the sector. Yeah, there's a reason that so many people, when you join, there's only a few people with videos on right now, but yeah, everyone's nodding. It's a thing of when you fall into housing and social housing, what it gives back. It's Sani said divide and conquer to distract the population, which is certainly very interesting kind of point there, but I think it's such a powerful sector.
But we never have TV programs. Someone's just put a point up about TV programs. Why do we never have a TV program of the positive things that are being done? I've got a friend in Nottingham who set up like a diverse food project, because like people went to food banks. They found that people went to food banks and they didn't get all the household things that they use, you know, like spices and certain vegetables and things like that. And she did a partnership with another housing association, and, you know, they set that up, and she couldn't have done that without them. She couldn't have done that without their support. But I doubt if you'd ever see a documentary about that project. Doubt it very much.
Yes, that it needs to be showcased. I don't know how it could be done, but social housing, positive news and positive things need to be showcased. And there's a lot more positive than it is negative. And we can't ignore the negatives. We have to tackle them, of course, like the work Kwajo's doing and all of those things. We need to tackle those issues because they shouldn't be there. And we know within housing we can do better. So we know that all the positive things that is happening, we need to showcase them to the world. We need to,
I mean, Matt did the round table about furniture poverty. I mean, if you saw the amazing things that people were talking about in that, it was so inspiring. I worked for Clarion years ago, and I remember Clarion, they built up all these partnerships with local charities, with like credit unions and whatnot, just so that, you know, people could be helped. But you never see a documentary about that. You won't ever see one.
No, that's right.
And it's therein lays so much of the problems. And that's, you know, if we're talking, you know, one of the key things seems to have come from today is if we're talking about how we change the stigma of social housing, it needs to be talked about for what it is, rather than just what it doesn't do or where it lets people down.
I think we all need to go back to our comms team and make some noise. And if you can't do it, tell me, I'll do it.
So Rachel's mentioned we get snippets of good news stories on the mainstream news, but that's 3 minutes, if that. There was a great programme on BBC a few years ago which followed a housing team in a local authority. It was brilliant, but again,
Oh, I remember
it's
that.
not
It was,
sensational, so it didn't get
Southwark
much.
Council.
Like you say, it wasn't sensationalised, so it didn't get much attention. Jim has had to sign off, absolutely fine. And we'll obviously get the recording sent round. But appreciate we've only got kind of 2 or 3 minutes left. And there's always a nightmare when it gets to the stage of suddenly we get another really good conversation going, and then everyone's like, I've got to go. Did anybody have any kind of final points they wanted to make before we wrapped up today? Brilliant. Right. Well, as Yasmin's mentioned there, let's go and get onto our comms and media team. But also, let's stop being quite so humble. Let's really kind of champion what it is we do, because even if you just talk about what it is you do each day, that's amazing for the amount of people it supports. We talk about stock sizes. We talk about, oh yeah, I think someone, Kitty mentioned before, I had stock size of 1,500. That's 1,500 stock. That's up to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people that you're supporting there. And yet, we kind of go, yeah, but that's the job. It might be the job, but it's a great job, and it's a job you're doing which needs doing so desperately. Thank you, absolutely, everybody, for joining. Thank you for coming along today. I will, like I say, get the recording out next week, as I mentioned earlier. Really looking forward to this. Joe, who was with us today, is discussing customer experience. It's become the new buzzword in housing. It used to be customer service. It's always been something. What does it mean, and what does it need to look like in order for this to be viable, in order to really kind of make change in the future? So please join me next week. Joe will be with me. I'll put your name there, Joe. You can't cancel on me now. Looking forward to that next week. And in the interim, have a brilliant week, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you. Thank
Cheers.
you.